Before Rome became a republic, it was a monarchy, yet not one shaped by the absolutism so common in the ancient world. In this early phase, Roman political life was already marked by structure, precedent, and constitutional restraint. In Chapter 5 of the History of Rome, Theodor Mommsen examines the foundations of Roman public law, a system where the household served as a model for the state, where kings ruled but did not reign unchecked, and where law was not imposed but agreed upon. This episode explores that original constitution, not as a romanticized origin story, but as a functional system built on legal formalism, shared authority, and limits on power. At the heart of it all was a civic order that understood, even in its earliest form, that enduring authority required more than force. It required form. Before Rome had magistrates or laws carved in bronze, it had fathers. Not metaphorically, but literally. The household father, or paterfamilias, was the original legislator, judge, and executor. His power extended over property, contracts, rituals, and even life and death within the household. It was this model, Mommsen explains, that formed the foundation of Roman constitutional thought. The Roman state, in its earliest form, was not built from abstract principles or philosophical speculation. It grew directly from the organic structure of the domus. The father ruled the family, just as the king would come to rule the city, not as a tyrant, but as a figure whose authority was grounded in ancestral custom, religious obligation, and legal precedent. Within the family, obedience was not negotiated. It was assumed. The son could not own property independent of the father. The daughter could not marry without paternal consent. Even adoption required the full legal ritual of the people's assembly, not because it disrupted the family, but because it redefined its legal core. In this sense, the Roman state inherited from the family both its form and its logic. Hierarchical, orderly, reverent toward tradition, and fiercely resistant to external interference. Mommsen insists that this early Roman constitutionalism was not a mechanism for domination. It was a framework for legal clarity. Every citizen was first a subject of his household. The state merely amplified that structure into a civic order. And unlike the Spartan model, where the state consumed the household into a militarized collective, Rome maintained the autonomy and sanctity of the private sphere. The state guaranteed this structure, not by dissolving it, but by anchoring it in law. Religious rituals, inheritance rights, and public responsibilities all stemmed from one's position within a household. Even political participation, voting, holding office, serving in the military, was rooted in one's legal identity as a free member of a Roman gens. To understand the Roman constitution, then, is not to begin with the Senate or the magistracies. It is to begin at the threshold of the home. Because for the Romans, political life was not the opposite of private life. It was its extension. In early Rome, the king was not a god, nor the voice of a divine order. He was something more structurally embedded and, in many ways, more Roman. He was the pater patriae, the father of the civic household. His authority was modeled directly on the domestic order, commanding, but bounded, supreme, but not absolute. Mommsen makes the comparison explicit. Just as the paterfamilias governed the household through custom and duty, the king exercised imperium, the right to command, over the collective body of citizens. But he did not invent law. He administered what already existed. His role was executive, judicial, and military, but never legislative in the modern sense. There was no royal edict that could override ancestral practice. If a new law or religious innovation was needed, it had to be sanctioned by the people in assembly. Even more, that most sovereign of state functions required formal ratification. The king could propose, he could act, but he could not rule by fiat. His office was not hereditary. Roman kings were chosen. Each ascended to power through a carefully structured process that required the approval of the Senate and the people. This elective nature gave the Roman monarchy a constitutional character. It was not dynastic power, but magistracy extended over time. Mommsen notes the irony. While in modern constitutional monarchies the sovereign reigns, but does not rule, in early Rome the king ruled, but did not reign alone. His authority was weighty, but always in relation to the communal body. He bore the religious burden of auspices and sacrifice. He led armies, presided over trials, and interpreted the will of the gods. But his office was public and revocable. Even his most sacred powers, such as the right of auspicium, were not personal privileges. They were attached to the office, not the man. Once he died or was removed, his imperium lapsed instantly. Power returned not to the next of kin, but to the Senate, which held it collectively until a new king could be chosen. Mommsen's point is clear. The Roman king was never above the state. He was its embodiment only insofar as he fulfilled the same legal and moral obligations expected of every citizen. Like the head of a household, he held authority in trust, not as a personal possession, but as a civic duty. Power in early Rome did not rest solely with the king. Beneath the throne, structured and deliberate, stood the comitia curiata, the assembly of the Roman people, organized by curiae or clan-based divisions. It was here that the civic community expressed its sovereignty, not in rhetoric, but in the act of assent. Mommsen is clear. The people did not legislate in the modern sense. They did not propose laws, nor debate policy. But they held the critical right of rogatio, to respond formally to a proposal laid before them. Their word was yes or no, but that word carried legal force. A proposal, no matter how regal its source, became binding only when the assembly ratified it. This was not symbolic. It was constitutional. And its most profound expression was found in the right of provocatio, the appeal from the king's judgment to the people's mercy. It was not a protest against royal justice. It was an institutionalized check upon it. The king could condemn, but he could not execute without granting the condemned a path to public pardon. Mommsen underscores the significance of this. Long before tribunes, before plebeian secession, before the vocabulary of republican liberty, Rome had already enshrined a practice that placed limits on coercive power. The people, organized not as an undifferentiated mass, but through ancient curiae, stood as the final court of appeal. Moreover, the assembly confirmed magistracies. No king could assume office without the formal lex curiata de imperio, the law by which the people transferred command. It was not enough to be chosen by the Senate or nominated by an interrex. Authority flowed from popular ratification. The people, even in monarchy, were the source of lawful power, and they guarded their role jealously. Any adoption of a new family member, any aggregatio, required their approval, for it altered the structure of households and therefore the structure of society. Religious offices, legal contracts, and even war declarations moved through their hands, if not by initiation, then by assent. Mommsen presents the comitia curiata not as a remnant of tribal governance, but as a functioning organ of early Roman constitutionalism. It was limited, yes, but it was decisive. Its actions were not advisory. They were legislative in effect. In a monarchy where the king ruled and the Senate advised, it was the people who retained the final power to validate. That power was not theoretical. It was exercised, recognized, and protected as an essential part of the Roman state from its earliest form. In the early Roman state, the Senate did not rule. It guarded. This assembly of elders, senas, from which it took its name, was not a sovereign body, nor a legislature in the republican sense. Its authority did not lie in command, but in continuity. It preserved, advised, confirmed, and, at times, intervened to restore constitutional order. Mommsen emphasizes that the Senate's original role was not political in the modern sense. It was juridical and custodial. Its members, patriarchs of Rome's great houses, were not representatives, but heads of families whose collective memory and precedent-bound authority formed a stabilizing force within the civic framework. They did not make laws, but they determined whether a proposal was legitimate. They did not declare war, but they could invalidate declarations that violated oaths, treaties, or sacred norms. The Senate did not initiate action. It restrained it. This power to intercede, to stand in the way of unconstitutional acts, was crucial. The Senate was the legal conscience of the Roman state. It preserved the boundaries of civic possibility and acted when either the king or the people exceeded their roles. Its silence meant assent. Its disapproval, though not always enforceable, was politically fatal. And yet, in moments of crisis, particularly during an interregnum, its authority surged. When a king died and no successor yet held imperium, sovereignty did not pass to a military commander or demagogue. It passed, by ancient right, to the Senate. In such periods, the Senate held collective imperium. It appointed interim rulers, known as interreges, who served in brief 5-day terms. These rotating magistrates ensured that the machinery of the state never collapsed, even when the throne stood empty. Mommsen underscores the subtlety of this design. Sovereignty in Rome did not die with the monarch. It reverted, temporarily, to the elder body, which held it in trust for the community. The Senate was thus not a rival to the king or the people, but their constitutional counterweight. Even later, as the Republic evolved and the Senate gained prominence, this early character remained. It did not govern by coercion. It governed by weight, auctoritas, not imperium. Its influence lay not in command, but in the long memory of its judgment. In the earliest Rome, then, the Senate was the most conservative institution, not in the ideological sense, but structurally. It conserved, it stabilized, it delayed, and in that delaying, it ensured that no single force, neither king nor people, could dissolve the system from within. In early Rome, law was not a command handed down from above. It was a contract, a formalized, reciprocal bond between ruler and ruled, between proposal and consent. The constitutional culture of Rome was rooted in this fundamental principle, that authority, no matter how powerful, required recognition to become legitimate. Mommsen describes a political system in which every act of public consequence, whether legislation, adoption, or the conferral of power, had to pass through a ritualized question-and-answer process. Rogare, to ask, was the act of posing a proposal before the people, and nothing could become binding without their response. This was not ceremonial. It was structural. Law in Rome took the form of lex, which was not simply a decree, but a formalized compact. Even private arrangements, such as wills, adoptions, aggregatio, and manumissions, required public assent when they altered the legal fabric of the civic order. Mommsen insists this formality was not pedantic. It was protective. It created a constitutional rhythm where nothing essential could be introduced into the civic body without undergoing scrutiny and affirmation. The sovereign did not dictate. He negotiated with precedent and with the people's will. This system was reinforced by language. The Latin legal vocabulary, so precise and so procedural, reflects a society where the legitimacy of power derived from form as much as content. There was no Roman Leviathan, no extra-legal sovereignty. The king's imperium had to be conferred, the Senate's authority had to be respected, the people's ratification had to be obtained. The Republic would later codify these dynamics in written law, but Mommsen shows that the constitutional culture was already embedded in oral custom, in shared expectation, and in public performance. It was a legal tradition that favored continuity over charisma and process over passion. In early Rome, sovereignty was not seized. It was constructed, negotiated, staged, and bound by the expectations of a society where law was not simply obeyed, but actively made. What distinguished early Rome from many of its contemporaries was not the scope of its power, but its limits. Mommsen draws attention to this with deliberate clarity. The Roman state, even in its monarchical phase, did not presume unlimited control over the citizen. It could compel military service. It could exact judgment. It could, in certain cases, even condemn a man to death. But it could not do so arbitrarily. And more critically, it could not touch the sanctity of a man's property, family, or legal standing without due and formal process. There was no permanent taxation. The idea that the state might levy a standing claim on the citizen's wealth was foreign to early Roman law. Contributions for war were extraordinary and tied to specific needs, not institutionalized as fiscal policy. Public land might be granted or reclaimed, but private property, once lawfully assigned, remained shielded from confiscation. The household, which lay at the root of Roman political organization, remained fundamentally inviolable. The state did not regulate marriage as a tool of policy, nor did it assume authority over inheritance unless a family line extinguished itself. Even adoptions required public approval, not because the state intervened in domestic life, but because the civic implications of family succession were too significant to ignore. Most strikingly, the appeal to the people in cases of capital punishment, provocatio ad populum, placed an early and powerful check on executive coercion. No king, however just or popular, could assume the right to execute a citizen without acknowledging the community's sovereign prerogative to judge or to pardon. Mommsen's point is not that early Rome was democratic in a modern sense, but that it was structurally opposed to despotism. Law and religion, custom and contract, these together formed a perimeter around state power. The state acted forcefully, but within form. It administered life, but did not seek to dominate it. Even the Senate, the most conservative body in the Constitution, could not act on mere impulse. Its decisions had to align with custom. Its guardianship was powerful, but not creative. No Roman institution presumed the right to redefine the citizen's life without constraint. Rome's early constitution was therefore not just a tool of governance. It was a shield, not ornamental, but functional, not philosophical, but legal. And it was precisely these limits, respected, ritualized, and enforced, that gave Rome its early durability. We'd love to hear your thoughts on possible future topics. What areas of human evolution would you like to explore next? Leave your suggestions in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. As always, our references and further reading are listed in the description below if you'd like to dive deeper into the subject. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.